Physics, Explain Simply Critical Thinking and Exposing False Experts, the Feynman Method. Have you ever nodded along to an expert, completely confident they knew what they were talking about, only to later discover they had no idea? You're not alone. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It happens constantly, in hospitals, in classrooms, in government committees, on your news feed, and yes, even in science itself. The world is full of people who sound like experts, dress like experts, get paid like experts, and have absolutely no deeper understanding of the thing they're confidently explaining to you. Richard Feynman knew this, and he spent his entire life doing something about it. Today we're going to learn how to think like Feynman. Not just about physics, not just about science, but about everything. We're going to learn how to spot the difference between genuine understanding and sophisticated-sounding nonsense. We're going to develop a kind of intellectual immune system, one that protects you from being fooled by authority, by jargon, by confidence, and by the very human desire to trust the person in the room who sounds the most certain. Because here's what Feynman understood better than almost anyone who has ever lived. Knowing the name of something is not the same as understanding it. And that difference, that seemingly small gap between naming and knowing, is where all the danger lives. The name is not the thing. Feynman tells a story about his father. When young Richard was a child, his dad would take him into the woods and point at birds. Other fathers might say, "That's a brown-throated thrush," and leave it there. But Feynman's father said something different. He said, in Italian, that bird is called such and such. In Chinese, something else. In Japanese, another name entirely. But here's the thing. You can know all the names in all the languages in the world, and you still know absolutely nothing about the bird. Sit with that for a second. You can memorize every label ever attached to a phenomenon and remain completely ignorant of how it actually works. This is not a minor philosophical point. This is the central problem with expertise as it is practiced and rewarded in the modern world. We have built systems, educational institutions, professional organizations, media structures that are extraordinarily good at producing people who know a great many names and a great many labels. And we have built systems that are remarkably bad at checking whether those people actually understand anything beneath a label. Feynman saw this everywhere. He saw it in the way physics was taught in Brazil, where students could recite textbook definitions without being able to explain a single real-world phenomenon. He saw it in the way NASA engineers discussed the Challenger shuttle's O-ring risk using language and committees that obscured rather than revealed the truth. He saw it in the endless parade of confident voices in academia, in government, in medicine, who had perfected the art of sounding knowledgeable while saying very little of actual substance. And he developed, over a lifetime of brilliant, restless thinking, a set of tools to cut through it. The Feynman technique, understanding as the only real currency. The first and most powerful of these tools is what many people now call the Feynman technique, though Feynman himself never gave it that name. He just called it learning. Here's how it works. Take any concept you want to understand. Now try to explain it to a 12-year-old, not a prodigy, just an ordinary curious kid who has no background in the subject. As soon as you hit a wall, as soon as you find yourself reaching for jargon, as soon as you say something like, "Well, it involves quantum coherence effects in the decoherence timescale of the system," stop. That's the wall. That's where your actual understanding ends and your memorized vocabulary begins. Go back. Break it down further. Find a simpler analogy. If you can't find one, that means you don't understand it yet. Real understanding always produces the ability to explain simply. This sounds almost insultingly obvious. Of course, experts should be able to explain things simply. Of course. But watch what happens when you actually apply this test to the people society labels as experts. Ask a financial advisor to explain, in plain language, what a collateralized debt obligation actually is, and why the 2008 crisis happened. Ask a nutritionist to explain mechanistically why their recommended diet is superior to the alternatives. Ask a political commentator to explain the specific causal chain by which a proposed policy will produce its promised outcomes. Now listen, not to the confidence, not to the vocabulary, not to the credentials listed after their name. Listen for whether they are actually explaining something or whether they are performing explanation. Listen for whether they can give you a simple, accurate, concrete picture of what is happening at the level of actual reality. You will be surprised how often the answer is, they can't. The challenger moment. When false expertise kills, let's talk about what happens when we don't apply this test. Let's talk about January 28, 1986. The Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch. 7 crew members died. The investigation that followed is one of the most important case studies in the history of critical thinking, not because of the technical failure, but because of the human failure that preceded it. Feynman was brought onto the Rogers Commission to investigate. What he found was something far more disturbing than a simple mechanical problem. He found a culture of institutionalized false expertise. He found that NASA managers were systematically disconnected from the engineers who actually understood the systems. He found that risk assessments had been produced through a process that would make any honest scientist's skin crawl. Engineers had raised concerns about the O-rings, the rubber seals that failed in the cold morning air. They had raised these concerns repeatedly. They had data, but somewhere in the chain between the engineers and the managers and the committees, the actual understanding got lost. What remained was a set of official-sounding processes, formal risk assessments, documented procedures that created the appearance of careful scientific evaluation while actually being nothing of the sort. Feynman's response was one of the most elegant acts of critical thinking ever performed on a public stage. He picked up a piece of O-ring material at the hearing. He put it in his glass of ice water. He let it sit there for a few minutes while the proceedings continued. Then, when it was his turn to speak, he pulled it out, squeezed it, and showed that the material lost its resiliency when cold. The explanation was over. You didn't need a PhD, you didn't need to read 1,000 pages of technical documents, you needed to see a piece of rubber squeezed in cold water. That is what genuine understanding looks like. It produces clarity, not complexity. It produces demonstrations, not documents. It cuts through institutional language like a scalpel. His famous conclusion from the investigation deserves to be framed and hung in every office where decisions are made. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. Nature cannot be fooled. Let that land. You can fool a committee, you can fool a press conference, you can fool a regulatory body with sufficiently complex documentation. You cannot fool physics, you cannot fool biology. You cannot fool the actual structure of reality by issuing a report that describes a different structure. This is the foundation of everything we're talking about today. Pseudoscience and the art of sounding scientific now. Here's where it gets interesting, because the same pattern Feynman identified in NASA bureaucracies, the gap between genuine understanding and performed expertise, is precisely what makes pseudoscience so effective. Pseudoscience is not usually stupid sounding. If it sounded stupid, it wouldn't work. It's designed to sound exactly like real science. It uses the vocabulary of real science. It gestures toward data. It invokes authority. It has practitioners with credentials, with white coats, with letters after their names, who speak in the measured tones we associate with careful, legitimate expertise. But here's the test. Always here is the test. Can they explain, in plain language, the mechanism? Not the correlation. Not the study they're citing. The mechanism. The actual physical or biological process by which the thing they're claiming happens. Take homeopathy as an example. The claim is that water that has been diluted so many times that not a single molecule of the original substance remains nonetheless retains a memory of that substance and can heal specific conditions. Now apply the Feynman test. Ask the practitioner to explain simply and mechanistically how water stores information. Ask them what physical property encodes this memory. Ask them why water doesn't equally remember every pipe it has ever flowed through, every container it has ever touched, every impurity it has ever encountered. You will not get a simple, mechanistic explanation. You will get a reference to quantum effects, perhaps. You will get an appeal to the fact that science doesn't understand everything. You will get a gesture toward ancient wisdom or clinical experience. What you will not get is a clear, testable, mechanistic account of what is actually happening at the level of physical reality. This is the tell. This is always the tell. Real mechanisms can be described. Sometimes a description is complex and requires years of education to fully appreciate, but real understanding at any level produces some concrete, graspable picture of what is happening. Electrons repel each other because they carry the same charge, and we can describe what that means and demonstrate it and predict its effects. Vaccines train the immune system by introducing a weakened or partial version of a pathogen, and we can describe that mechanism at the cellular level and test it and predict its effects. The inability to provide a mechanism is not automatically proof of falsehood. Science has many genuine mysteries, but the inability to provide a mechanism, combined with confident claims of effectiveness, combined with hostility to the very question of mechanism, that combination is a very reliable signal that something is wrong. The cargo cult, the most important metaphor Feynman ever gave us in 1974, Feynman delivered a commencement address at Caltech that contained what may be the single most useful concept for navigating the modern information environment. He described what he called cargo cult science. During World War II, the Allied forces built airstrips on remote Pacific islands. Planes landed. Cargo arrived. To the island communities who witnessed this, the planes and the cargo seemed to be summoned by the rituals of the soldiers, the radio operations, the signals, the flags, the movements on the runway. When the war ended and the planes stopped coming, some communities built their own airstrips. They made their own headphones from coconut shells. They lit their own fires to simulate the runway lights. They performed all the outward rituals of what they had seen with complete sincerity, waiting for the planes to return. The form was perfect. The substance was entirely absent. Feynman's point was devastating. A great deal of what passes for scientific practice in many fields is exactly this. It has the form of science. It has the peer review, the statistical analysis, the control groups, the published papers, the citation counts, the conferences, the institutional affiliations. It performs all the outward rituals, but it lacks the essential substance of science, which is the honest, systematic attempt to find out whether you are wrong. Stop. Think about that for a moment. The whole point of scientific methodology is not to prove that you're right. It's to give reality every possible opportunity to prove that you're wrong. The double-blind trial exists not to confirm the treatment, but to eliminate every possible way that bias or coincidence could masquerade as effectiveness. Statistical significance thresholds exist not to celebrate positive results, but to make it very hard for noise to look like signal. When you see people who are selecting studies that support their conclusion and ignoring studies that don't, who are using technical language to make unfounded claims sound rigorous, who are conducting trials without proper controls because controls might produce inconvenient results, you are watching cargo called science. You are watching people who have learned to perform the rituals of knowledge-seeking while systematically avoiding the thing that makes knowledge-seeking work. Wes, the authority problem. Why credentials are necessary but not sufficient? Now, you might be thinking, but surely credentials matter? Surely a cardiologist knows more about heart disease than I do? Surely a climate scientist understands the climate better than a blogger? Yes, of course. Domain expertise is real. The years of training that produce genuine understanding are not nothing. They are enormously important. And one of the most dangerous forms of false expertise is the kind practiced by people who dismiss all expert consensus on the grounds that experts can be wrong, as though the occasional wrongness of expertise means that non-experts are equally reliable sources of understanding. They are not. But here's the nuance that Feynman was always trying to point at. Credentials certify that a person has passed through a system of training. They do not guarantee that the person emerged from that system with genuine understanding rather than sophisticated vocabulary. They do not guarantee that the person's expertise in one domain extends to the adjacent domain where they're now pronouncing judgment. And they absolutely do not guarantee that the person is reasoning honestly, rather than defending a position they arrived at through interest, habit, or ideology. Feynman was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He had every credential that existed in his field. He also spent enormous energy questioning, testing, and sometimes overturning the consensus positions of his own field. That is not a contradiction. That is what genuine expertise actually looks like from the inside. It is comfortable with uncertainty. It is hostile to its own potential errors. It welcomes challenges because challenges are how you find out if you're wrong. The false expert, by contrast, is invested in their conclusions. They are made uncomfortable by challenges. They appeal to credentials, to consensus, to authority, to everything except the actual question. Here is the mechanism I am proposing. Here is the evidence that supports it. Here are the tests that could disprove it. Here are the tests that could disprove it. Here are the tests I have done to try to disprove it. Here is why I still believe it despite my efforts to prove myself wrong. That structure, that architecture of honest reasoning, is the fingerprint of genuine expertise. Its absence is the fingerprint of cargo cult science. 3 thought experiments for everyday thinking. Let's make this practical. Here are 3 tests you can run on any claim, any expert, any piece of information that comes across your screen, or your desk, or your conversation. The first is the mechanism test. Whatever the claim is, ask yourself, can I trace the actual physical or causal process by which this is supposed to happen? If someone tells you that a supplement boosts your immune system, can they tell you which immune cells are affected and by what mechanism? If someone tells you that a policy will reduce unemployment, can they trace the actual causal chain from policy action to economic behavior to employment outcome? If someone tells you that a historical event happened in a particular way, can they point you toward the primary evidence they're working from? Mechanism. Always look for mechanism. The second is the falsification test. What would it take to prove this claim wrong? This is the question Feynman's hero Karl Popper elevated into the cornerstone of scientific thinking. A claim that cannot even in principle be proven wrong is not a scientific claim. It's a belief. That doesn't necessarily mean it's false, but it means it's operating in a different register than science, and you should treat it accordingly. When an expert presents their view, ask, at least in your own mind, what evidence would cause them to change their position. If the answer seems to be nothing, if every possible counterexample gets explained away, if the theory always somehow survives every conceivable test, that's a warning sign. The third is the simplification test, Feynman's test. Ask them to explain it simply, not to condescend to you, not to oversimplify in ways that strip out meaning, but to find the core of what they are saying and express it in language that does not require specialized training to understand. If they can't do this, one of 2 things is true. Either the subject matter genuinely requires extensive background before it can be understood at all, which is sometimes true, and they should be able to explain why that's the case, or they don't actually understand it themselves. The educational system and what it gets wrong, Feynman's most consistent and passionate critique was aimed at education, not at teachers, many of whom he admired, but at the system that education had become, the vast machinery of examinations and textbooks and curricula that had been optimized to produce students who could pass tests, rather than students who could think. He spent time in Brazil and was genuinely disturbed by what he found. Students could reproduce correct answers on physics problems. But when he asked them questions that required applying the principles to unfamiliar situations, they were lost. They had learned to match patterns. They had not learned to understand reality. This matters enormously because the educational system is the factory that produces both our experts and our general public understanding of expertise. When we train people to treat physics or medicine or economics as a set of correct answers to be memorized rather than a set of tools for understanding reality, we produce graduates who have the vocabulary of expertise without the substance. And here's the truly uncomfortable implication. You have been shaped by this system. So have the experts you rely on. So has everyone. The question is not whether the system has affected you, it has, but whether you can see the shape of that effect clearly enough to work against it. The way to work against it is not to distrust everything, is to develop active, curious, evidence-seeking engagement with the things you encounter, is to resist the comfort of authority and lean into the discomfort of genuine questions. It's to notice when you are nodding along because something sounds credible, and force yourself to ask, but what is the actual mechanism? But what evidence supports this? But what would I expect to see if this were wrong? And do I see it? Misinformation in the attention economy. This brings us to the particular challenge of the era we're living in, because the dynamics that Feynman identified in 1974 have been accelerated by several orders of magnitude by the attention economy of the internet. False expertise has always existed, but it has never had so efficient a distribution mechanism. A century ago, a charismatic but wrong-headed voice could reach a few thousand people through lectures and pamphlets. Today, the same voice, given the right aesthetic packaging and algorithmic tailoring, can reach millions in hours. And here's what makes this particularly hard. The signals we evolved to use when assessing the credibility of information, confidence, fluency, social proof, attractive presentation, institutional association, are almost perfectly exploited by the modern content ecosystem. The people who are best at appearing credible online are often not the people with the deepest understanding. They are the people with the best understanding of how to appear credible. Feynman's toolkit becomes, in this environment, not just intellectually valuable but almost survival level important, because the traditional shortcuts to credibility have been systematically compromised. The credential could be fake, or in an unrelated field, or from an institution you haven't heard of. The institution could have a financial interest in the conclusion. The study could have been cherry-picked from a sea of contradictory studies. The confidence could be a performance. What cannot be easily faked, at least not indefinitely to someone who knows what to look for, is genuine mechanistic understanding. You can fake credentials. You cannot easily fake the ability to explain how something works in simple language that holds up under questioning. Learning to sit with uncertainty. There is one more piece to this, and it might be the hardest part of all. One of the things that makes false expertise so appealing, so emotionally satisfying, is that it offers certainty. Real science, real honest reasoning, is constantly saying things like, we have strong evidence for this, but here are the uncertainties, and this is our best current understanding, which may be revised, and the honest answer is, we don't fully know yet. That's uncomfortable. Human beings don't like uncertainty. We are wired through millions of years of evolution in environments where uncertainty often meant danger, to prefer clear explanations even if they're wrong, over ambiguous, honest accounts that leave questions open. The pseudoscientist, the false expert, the confident voice with no real understanding, they are selling certainty, and we are buying it because we are wired to want it. Feynman's response to this was not to force yourself to be comfortable with uncertainty, though that helps. His response was to change what you find beautiful. He found genuine uncertainty beautiful because genuine uncertainty means there is something real left to discover. He found the honest, I don't know, more thrilling than any false certainty because I don't know is the beginning of an actual journey. He said once, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. That is not just a witty line. That is a complete philosophy of intellectual life. Questions that can't be answered are the frontier of understanding. Answers that can't be questioned are the death of it, the invitation. So here's where we arrive. You now have an outline at least, the toolkit that Feynman spent his life developing and demonstrating. You have the mechanism test, you have the falsification test, you have the simplification test, you have the understanding that credentials certify training but not genuine comprehension. You have the concept of cargo cult science, the performance of rigor without its substance. You have Feynman's own example, that genius is not about knowing more than everyone else. It's about being more honest than everyone else about what you actually understand and what you don't. These tools do not make you infallible. Nothing does. They do not mean you should distrust all expertise. You shouldn't. They do not mean you should assume that the contrarian voice is always closer to truth than the institutional consensus. It usually isn't. What they mean is that you have the equipment to engage thoughtfully, rather than passively, with the information that flows towards you every day. You can sit with a health claim and ask, what's the mechanism? You can watch a political argument and ask, what's the causal chain? You can read a news story about a scientific discovery and ask, what would it take for this to be wrong? You can listen to an expert speak and ask, beneath all the fluency and authority, does this person actually understand what they're talking about, or are they performing understanding? These are small acts of intellectual courage. They are uncomfortable. They require admitting that you don't know things, which our culture makes surprisingly difficult. They sometimes lead you to conclusions that are less satisfying and more complicated than the confident alternative being offered. But they are the only path to actually knowing things rather than just believing things with great confidence. Wirt, the beauty Feynman wanted you to see. Feynman believed, with a passion that bordered on religious in its intensity, that the world understood honestly is more beautiful than any simplified or falsified version of it. He thought that people were being robbed by bad education and false expertise and comfortable certainties of the experience of actually understanding reality, which he thought was the most exciting experience available to a human being. He used to look at a flower and say something like, I can see it as a botanist and understand its cellular structure. I can see it as a physicist and understand the way its color emerges from the interaction of light and molecular structure. I can see it as an evolutionary biologist and understand the pressures that shaped it over millions of years. Every layer of real understanding adds to the beauty. It doesn't subtract. The person who sees only pretty petals is not having a richer experience than the person who also sees the physics. They're having a narrower one. The same is true of everything you've learned today. When you apply the Feynman toolkit to the claims you encounter, you are not becoming cynical. You are not becoming a person who trusts nothing and believes nothing. You are becoming a person who experiences the world with greater resolution, who can see more of what is actually there, because you are no longer filling in the gaps with comfortable but false certainties. That is not the loss of wonder. That is wonder taken seriously, and there is no physicist who has ever lived, no scientist, no thinker of any kind who modeled that truth more completely, more joyfully, or more usefully than Richard Feynman. The question he spent his life asking was never what is the answer. It was always how do we actually know? And that question, simple and relentless and beautiful, is the most powerful tool any human being has ever picked up. Use it.